She married a man who promised her the world, luxury, security, forever. But on their wedding night, when she passed by an ancient mirror in his mansion, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The reflection showed her husband's true face, and it wasn't human. If you love twisted tales of mystery and deception, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story will keep you on the edge of your seat. Now, let's dive in. Her name was Nia, and she thought she knew what love was. At 28 years old, she was working at a small art gallery in the city, living paycheck to paycheck in a tiny apartment with her cat. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. She had dreams of traveling, of seeing the world, of maybe one day opening her own gallery. But dreams don't pay the bills, and she was stuck in a routine that felt like it would never change. That all shifted the night she met Kofi. It was a charity event at one of those fancy hotels where champagne flows like water and everyone's wearing clothes that cost more than 3 months of rent. Nia was only there because the gallery had donated a few pieces, and her boss insisted someone should attend. She felt completely out of place in her borrowed dress, clutching a glass of wine and trying not to stare at the crystal chandeliers hanging from the impossibly high ceiling. Then he walked up to her. Kofi was the kind of handsome that stops conversations mid-sentence. Tall, with deep brown skin that seemed to glow under the warm lights, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that held secrets. He wore a perfectly tailored burgundy suit that probably cost more than her car. But it wasn't his looks that caught Nia's attention. It was the way he smiled when he asked about the painting she was standing near, like he genuinely cared about her answer, like she was the most interesting person in the room. They talked for hours that night. He told her he was in international business, that he traveled constantly, that he'd made his fortune in investments most people wouldn't understand. He asked about her dreams, her fears, what made her laugh. By the end of the evening, Nia felt like she'd known him forever, like they'd been searching for each other their entire lives. The next 3 months were like living in a fairy tale. Kofi took her to restaurants she'd only read about in magazines. He sent flowers to the gallery every Friday, always with handwritten notes that made her blush when her co-workers teased her. He flew her to the coast for weekend getaways, where they'd walk along the beach at sunset, and he'd tell her stories about places he'd been, things he'd seen. He made her feel special, chosen, like she was the only woman in the world who mattered. Her best friend Thandiwe was suspicious from the start. She'd known Nia since college, and she wasn't easily impressed by money or charm. One evening, over coffee at their usual spot, Thandiwe leaned across the table with that look she gets when she's about to say something uncomfortable. "Nia, don't you think this is moving really fast?" Thandiwe asked, stirring her cup nervously. 3 months, and you're already talking about moving in together?" Nia laughed it off, her cheeks flushing. "When you know," she said, repeating something Kofi had told her the night before. "But what do you actually know about him?" Thandiwe pressed, her voice dropping lower. "I tried looking him up online. There's nothing. No social media, no business profiles, no photos. It's like he doesn't exist." Nia felt defensive, protective of what she and Kofi had built together. "He values his privacy," she explained, echoing Kofi's words. "Rich people don't broadcast their lives online like we do. It makes them targets." Thandiwe wasn't convinced, but she could see the dreamy look in her friend's eyes. She'd seen that look before, and she knew that nothing she said would make a difference. Love, or whatever this was, had already taken hold. 2 weeks later, Kofi proposed. He took Nia to his estate in the countryside, a place he'd mentioned but never shown her before. The drive took nearly 3 hours, winding through forests and hills until they reached an iron gate that opened automatically as they approached. The mansion beyond was breathtaking and terrifying at the same time. It was old, incredibly old, with stone walls covered in ivy and towers that reached toward the gray sky. It looked like something from a Gothic novel, beautiful and haunting. "This has been in my family for generations," Kofi explained as they walked through the massive wooden doors. "I wanted you to see it before I asked you something important." The interior was just as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings with exposed wooden beams, antique furniture that looked priceless, paintings in heavy gold frames lining the walls. Everything was perfect, almost too perfect, like a museum where people weren't really meant to live. Kofi led her to a garden at the back of the estate, where roses bloomed in impossible shades of red and white. The sun was setting, painting the sky in oranges and purples. He got down on one knee, pulled out a velvet box, and opened it to reveal a diamond ring so large it didn't look real. "Nia," he said, his voice steady and sure, "I've waited my whole life to find someone like you. Marry me. Be mine forever." She said yes without hesitation. How could she not? This was everything she'd ever dreamed of, everything she thought only happened in movies. The ring slid onto her finger perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for her. The wedding was planned for 2 weeks later. Kofi insisted on having it at the mansion, said it was tradition in his family. Nia thought it was romantic, even though it meant a small ceremony. Thandiwe tried one more time to talk sense into her friend. 2 weeks, Nia? That's insane. You barely know this man. You've never met his family. He won't tell you anything specific about his business. Please, just slow down." But Nia was already lost in wedding plans, in fabric swatches and flower arrangements. She heard her friend's concerns, but didn't really listen. Love makes you deaf to reason sometimes, makes you ignore the warning signs that everyone else can see clearly. The wedding day arrived faster than Nia expected. She stood in one of the mansion's many bedrooms, staring at herself in a full-length mirror. Her wedding dress was cream-colored with delicate lace sleeves, simple but elegant. She looked beautiful. Even she had to admit that. But there was something in her reflection's eyes, some small flicker of doubt that she quickly pushed away. The ceremony was held in the mansion's grand hall as the sun began to set. Only a handful of guests attended, mostly men in expensive suits, who Kofi introduced as business associates. They smiled politely, but didn't really engage in conversation. No one from Kofi's family was present. When Nia asked about it earlier, he'd simply said they were estranged, that it was complicated, that she was his family now. Thandiwe was there, standing as the maid of honor, her face a mask of concern that she tried to hide behind a forced smile. She hugged Nia before the ceremony and whispered, "It's not too late to change your mind." But it was too late. Or at least, that's what Nia thought as she walked down the aisle toward Kofi, who looked impossibly handsome in his white suit. He smiled at her, but there was something different about him that day. He seemed nervous, distracted, kept glancing at the windows as if checking the position of the sun. The ceremony was quick, almost rushed. The officiant, an elderly man with a thick accent that Nia couldn't place, spoke in words that sounded more like an incantation than traditional vows. Before she knew it, she was kissing her new husband, and everyone was clapping politely. Though the sound seemed hollow in the vast room, the reception was brief. The guests ate dinner in near silence, drank expensive wine, and left as soon as it was socially acceptable. By 9 o'clock, The mansion was empty except for Nia and Kofi. And the staff, though Nia realized she hadn't actually seen any staff members all day. "I'm going to check on something in my study," Kofi said, kissing her forehead. "Why don't you explore the house? Get familiar with your new home. I'll join you soon." He walked away before she could respond, disappearing down a corridor she hadn't noticed before. Nia stood alone in her wedding dress in the grand entrance hall, suddenly feeling very small in the enormous space. The mansion was quiet. Too quiet. No sounds of kitchen staff cleaning up. No footsteps on the floors above. Just silence that seemed to press against her ears. She decided to take Kofi's advice and explore. After all, this was her home now. She should know her way around. She wandered through room after room, each more impressive than the last. A library, with books that looked centuries old. A dining room with a table that could seat 20 people. A music room with a grand piano covered in a thin layer of dust. Everything was beautiful, but untouched, as if no one actually lived here. Then, she found the hallway. It was tucked behind a door she almost missed, hidden in a corner near the back of the mansion. The hallway was different from the rest of the house, darker, older, with stone walls instead of plastered ones. Candles in iron sconces provided the only light, casting dancing shadows that made Nia's heart beat faster. She should have turned back. Every instinct told her to return to the main part of the house, to wait for Kofi like he'd asked. But curiosity pulled her forward, step by step down that dark corridor. And then she saw it. The mirror. It hung on the wall at the end of the hallway, massive and ornate. The frame was made of dark wood carved with strange symbols and faces that seemed to watch her as she approached. The glass itself looked ancient, slightly warped, with a silvery quality that made everything reflected in it look dreamlike. Nia stopped in front of it, staring at her reflection. She looked tired, she realized. The excitement of the day had worn her out. Her makeup was smudged slightly at the corners of her eyes. She reached up to fix it. That's when she saw him in the mirror behind her. Kofi's reflection stood at the entrance to the hallway, watching her. But it wasn't Kofi. Not the Kofi she knew. The face in the mirror was gaunt, pale like something that had never seen sunlight. His eyes were sunken, surrounded by dark circles that made them look hollow. His mouth was twisted in a smile that showed teeth that were too sharp, too many. His hands, resting at his sides, had fingers that were too long, ending in nails that looked more like claws. Nia screamed and spun around. Kofi stood there, looking exactly as he always did. Handsome, concerned, normal. He rushed toward her, his face full of worry. "Nia, what's wrong? What happened?" She couldn't speak, couldn't form words. Her hand shook as she pointed at the mirror, then at him, then back at the mirror. He followed her gaze to the ancient glass, and for just a moment, something flickered across his face. Fear? Anger? She couldn't tell. "You're exhausted," he said gently, taking her hands in his. His hands felt normal, warm, human. "It's been a long day. The champagne, the stress, it's all catching up with you. Let me take you to bed." "But I saw—" Nia started, her voice trembling. "You saw what?" Kofi asked, his tone still gentle but with an edge of something else underneath. "Shadows? Old mirrors play tricks, especially in candlelight. This place is full of them. You'll get used to it." He was right. It had to be the stress, the exhaustion. Maybe she'd had more wine than she thought. Her mind was playing tricks on her. That's all it was. She let him lead her away from the mirror, back through the hallway, though she couldn't help glancing back one more time. The mirror reflected only empty space now. the candles flickering in their sconces. Kofi took her to a bedroom she hadn't seen before. It was beautiful, with a massive four-poster bed and windows that overlooked the gardens. He helped her out of her wedding dress, hung it carefully in the wardrobe, brought her a silk nightgown. "You should rest," he said, kissing her gently on the forehead. "Tomorrow, everything will feel different. Better." "Aren't you staying?" Nia asked, confused. It was their wedding night. "I have some work to finish," Kofi said, already moving toward the door. "Important business that can't wait. It's tradition in my family anyway. The bride and groom spend their first night in separate rooms. For luck." That didn't sound like any tradition Nia had ever heard of, but she was too tired to argue, too shaken by what she'd seen, or thought she'd seen, in the mirror. She nodded, and Kofi left, closing the door softly behind him. Nia lay in the enormous bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that face in the mirror. Those hollow eyes, those sharp teeth. She told herself it was her imagination, that stress and exhaustion could make you see things that weren't there. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, she knew what she'd seen was real. As the night stretched on, Nia made a decision. Tomorrow, in the light of day, when everything seemed less frightening, she would investigate. She would find out the truth about the man she'd married, about this mansion, about that mirror. She needed to know, even if part of her was terrified of what she might discover. Outside her window, clouds covered the moon, plunging the gardens into complete darkness. Somewhere in the mansion, footsteps echoed on stone floors, and in the hallway with the ancient mirror, candles continued to burn, their flames casting shadows that moved like living things against the walls. Nia had thought she was beginning a fairy tale. What she didn't know yet was that she'd walked into a nightmare, and escaping it would require more courage than she'd ever had to summon in her entire life. The morning came slowly, gray light creeping through the windows. Nia hadn't slept much, maybe an hour or two in fits and starts. Every sound in the old mansion had jerked her awake. Creaking wood, wind against the windows, something that might have been footsteps in the hallway outside her room. When she finally got up and dressed, she found the mansion just as quiet as it had been the night before. No sounds of breakfast being prepared, no servants moving about. She made her way downstairs, calling for Kofi, but received no answer. That's when her real investigation began. If Kofi wasn't around to stop her, to explain things away with his charming smile and reasonable explanations, then she would find the truth herself. She started with the library she'd seen the day before, the one with all the ancient books. Most of the books were in languages she didn't recognize, or written in script so old she couldn't make out the letters. But then she found one, pushed to the back of a lower shelf, almost hidden. It was a journal, leather-bound and worn, with pages that crumbled slightly at the edges when she opened it. The handwriting inside was old-fashioned but readable. It was dated from over 200 years ago, written by someone named Kwame. As Nia read, her hands began to shake. The journal detailed a bargain. Kwame had been poor, desperate, willing to do anything to save his family from starvation. He'd made a deal with something he called the Ancient One, something that lived in the darkness between worlds. In exchange for wealth beyond imagining, Kwame agreed to a price. His family would prosper for generations, but they would no longer be entirely human. Every generation would have to feed, not on food, but on life force, on the essence of living beings. They could appear normal, could walk among humans, could even love. But their true nature would always show in mirrors, those ancient tools that supposedly reflected the soul. And every generation, to sustain themselves, they needed to marry someone innocent, someone pure. The wives never lasted long. Some entries described them wasting away, growing weaker as their husbands fed on their life force. Others simply vanished, and Kwame didn't elaborate on what happened to them. The last entry in the journal made Nia's blood run cold. Kwame wrote about a mirror, a special mirror forged by the Ancient One itself. This mirror couldn't lie. It showed the truth, no matter what glamour or illusion someone wore. He'd hung it in the oldest part of the mansion as a reminder, a warning to future generations about what they truly were. Nia dropped the journal, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. It couldn't be true. It had to be fiction, a story, maybe something written for a novel that was never published. But even as she tried to rationalize it, she knew. She knew because she'd seen Kofi's true face in that mirror. She had to get out. Now. Immediately. Nia ran through the mansion toward the front door. It was locked. She pulled and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. She tried the windows in the front room. Locked. Every window she tried on the ground floor was sealed tight, as if they'd never been meant to open. Going somewhere? Kofi's voice came from behind her, smooth and calm. Nia turned to see him standing in the doorway, dressed casually in a gray shirt and slacks. He looked perfect, normal, like the man she'd fallen in love with. But now she couldn't unsee what she knew he truly was. "I want to leave," Nia said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need some air. Let me out, Kofi." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You read the journal." It wasn't a question. Somehow, he knew. "It's not real," Nia said, though she didn't believe her own words. "It can't be real." Kofi walked toward her slowly, each step deliberate. "It's very real, Nia. Every word. My family's curse, our gift, depending on how you look at it. We've had wealth and power for centuries. All it costs is what we are." "And what are you?" Nia whispered. "I'm something between worlds," Kofi said. "Not quite human, not quite other. And yes, I need to feed. But I love you, Nia. That's real. More real than anything else in my life. I fought against this. I tried to resist choosing someone, tried to ignore the hunger. But then I met you, and I couldn't help myself." Nia felt tears streaming down her face. "The other wives, what happened to them?" Kofi's expression darkened. "They weren't strong enough. The feeding took too much from them. But you're different. I can feel it. You're stronger. You can survive this. We can have a real life together. A life where you slowly drain away my soul." Nia backed away from him. "That's not love, Kofi. That's murder." "I'll be careful," he insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "I'll take just enough to survive. You'll barely feel it. We can travel, see the world like you always wanted. I have all the money we could ever need. We can be happy." But Nia could see the hunger in his eyes now, could see the way he was looking at her. Not like a husband looks at a wife, but like a predator looks at prey. She remembered the journal's descriptions of the other wives, how they'd grown weaker, how some had begged to die before the end came. "Let me go," she said firmly. "I won't tell anyone. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." Kofi shook his head sadly. "I can't do that. The marriage binds you to me now. The ceremony, the words the officiant spoke, they weren't just tradition. They were a binding. You're mine, Nia, for as long as you live." That's when Nia realized she had no choice. She had to fight. She had to find a way out, or she'd end up like all the others, a footnote in a journal that would be hidden away for the next unsuspecting bride to find too late. She ran, not toward the doors or windows, but deeper into the mansion. If she couldn't get out, maybe she could find a weapon, something to defend herself with. Or maybe she could find that mirror again. The journal had said it was made by the Ancient One. Perhaps it was more than just a reflection. Perhaps it was a key. Kofi chased after her, not running, just walking with that same deliberate pace. He knew she had nowhere to go. The mansion was his domain, had been his family's for centuries. He knew every corridor, every hidden room, every secret passage. But Nia was desperate, and desperate people do things they never thought possible. She grabbed a candlestick from a hallway table as she ran, heavy brass that could serve as a weapon. She threw open doors at random, looking for anything that might help her. In one room, she found more journals, dozens of them, all written by different members of Kofi's family over the centuries. In another, she found paintings of women, beautiful women in old-fashioned clothes, each with a plaque underneath with a name and dates. The dates never lasted more than a few years. These were the wives, Nia realized. This was their memorial. Finally, she found herself back in that dark hallway, standing in front of the ancient mirror. In its reflection, she could see herself, terrified and shaking, holding the candlestick like a weapon. And behind her, she could see Kofi, as he truly was, his monstrous form casting shadows that seemed to move independently of his body. "That mirror," Nia said, not taking her eyes off his reflection. "The journal said it was made by the Ancient One. It's connected to your curse, isn't it?" Kofi stopped at the entrance to the hallway, his normal face contorting slightly. "Don't touch it." That's when Nia understood. The mirror wasn't just a reflection. It was an anchor, a physical link to the bargain that had started this whole nightmare. She looked at Kofi's true form in the reflection, saw how the mirror seemed to be the only thing holding his glamour in place. "If I destroy this mirror," Nia said slowly, "what happens to you?" "Nia, please," Kofi said, and for a moment he sounded like the man she'd fallen in love with. "Don't do this. I can change. I can find another way. Just give me a chance." But Nia had read the journal. She'd seen the paintings of the dead wives. She knew there was no other way, not for Kofi, not for any of his cursed family. They were bound to this evil, generation after generation, and she would not be another victim. She raised the candlestick and brought it down on the mirror with all her strength. The glass shattered with a sound like screaming. Shards flew everywhere, and for a moment the entire mansion seemed to shake. Kofi screamed too, a sound that wasn't human, filled with rage and pain, and something that might have been relief. Nia watched in the remaining pieces of the mirror as his form began to change. Not back to his handsome human appearance, but aging, rapidly, as if all the centuries his family had cheated death were catching up at once. His skin wrinkled and dried, his hair turned white and fell out in clumps. He collapsed to the floor, his body crumbling like ancient paper. Within moments, there was nothing left but dust and the clothes he'd been wearing. The mansion groaned around her, and Nia heard the sound of locks clicking open throughout the building. The binding was broken. The curse was ended. She ran through the hallways, past the paintings of the dead wives, past the library with its terrible journals, past all the wealth and luxury that had been bought with innocent lives. She burst through the front doors, which swung open easily now, and ran down the long driveway toward the iron gates. They stood open, welcoming her escape. Behind her, she heard a rumbling sound and turned to see the mansion beginning to collapse, walls crumbling inward, the roof caving in. It was as if the building itself had been held together by the same curse that had sustained Kofi's family. And now that the curse was broken, it could finally rest. Nia didn't stop running until she reached the main road. A car passed by, and she flagged it down, desperate and crying. The driver, an elderly woman with kind eyes, didn't ask questions, just drove her to the nearest town and dropped her at the police station. The authorities found the ruins of the mansion 3 days later, after Nia finally felt strong enough to tell them where it was. They found nothing but rubble and dust. No bodies, no journals, no paintings. It was as if everything connected to that cursed family had simply ceased to exist when the mirror broke. Thandiwe picked Nia up from the hospital where they'd kept her for observation. Her friend hugged her tight and didn't say, "I told you so," even though she had every right to. She just took Nia home, made her tea, and stayed with her until the nightmares began to fade. Months later, Nia sometimes wondered if it had all been real, or if she'd had some kind of breakdown. But then, she'd look at her left hand, at the faint scar where the wedding ring had been. She'd tried to remove the ring after escaping, and it had burned her skin before crumbling to nothing. The scar remained, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful promises hide the darkest truths. She never married again. Never even dated. How could she, after everything she'd seen? But she survived, and that was more than all those other women had managed. She was alive, free, and she'd broken a curse that had lasted for centuries. Sometimes, late at night, she thought about Kofi as he'd been when she first met him. Charming, attentive, making her feel special. She wondered if any part of that had been real, if monsters could truly love, or if it had all been an act to lure in his next victim. She'd never know. And maybe, Nia decided, that was okay. Some questions didn't need answers. Some doors, once closed, should stay closed forever. Nia survived, but she never forgot what she saw in that mirror. Sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones who look perfectly human. The mansion was found in ruins weeks later, but Kofi's body was never recovered. Some say the curse wasn't completely broken, that somewhere out there, something still hunts in the darkness. But Nia knew the truth. She'd destroyed the anchor, broken the chain, ended generations of suffering. And that was enough. What would you do if you discovered your partner's darkest secret? Let me know in the comments below. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and subscribe for more twisted tales. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, maybe think twice before looking in old mirrors.